Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Yuka Royer. Coming up in this special edition, a pivotal moment for Taiwan as its 19 million voters head to the polls on January the 13th to choose their next president. The stakes are higher than ever for this self-ruled island on a geopolitical fault line. The outcome of the election could have implications for the entire region and beyond. It's an island with an area slightly smaller than Switzerland. Taiwan, formerly known as the Republic of China, is home to more than 23 million people and has a vibrant free market economy. Elections are held every 4 years, and since the first multi-party vote was held in 1996, there have been 3 peaceful transfers of power. Now, the stakes are particularly high for this year's elections, as China, which claims Taiwan as its own territory, has gone as far as to cast the vote as a choice between war and peace. With me on set is Victor Louzon, assistant professor of Sorbonne University, who specialises in modern East Asian history. Great to have you on our show.
Hey, hello.
Well, thank you. Well, first off, very quickly, before we delve into the history, it's one of the most closely watched votes in Taiwan's history and indeed around the world this year. Why do Taiwan's elections matter to the rest of the world?
Well, they matter to the extent that the cross-strait relations, basically relations between Taipei and Beijing, have regional implications in terms of security, like regional and global, because as you briefly mentioned, there is a de facto security guarantee, which is not explicit, but it's almost explicit by the United States for Taiwan, which means that any conflict with China could degenerate and escalate into a global or at least Sino-American conflict.
Now, indeed, relations with China are high on the minds of voters in Taiwan. The tensions across the Taiwanese Strait and the island's precarious sovereignty are deeply rooted in its history. France 24's Alison Sargent takes a closer look.
The rift began with an exile in 1949, at the end of China's civil war, as Mao Zedong's communists took power on the mainland. Nationalist ruler Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan. He and his Kuomintang Party, or KMT, declared martial law, the start of a period known as the White Terror. Taiwan became the seat of the Republic of China, which remains the island's official name. For years, both the nationalists and the communists claimed to be China's legitimate representative, but Taiwan's KMT government lost out in 1971 when the UN voted to hand over its seat to the People's Republic of China.
Do you have anything to say? Is this a final leaving?
Well over a decade later, in 1987, Taiwan began its transition to democracy, and in 1996 held its first ever free, direct presidential election. 2 decades after that, in 2016, Taiwan elected its first female president and first leader from the Democratic People's Party, which strongly supports the island's de facto independence. Since Ing-wen has been in office, the island has doubled down on its progressive ideals, including formally apologizing to its many indigenous groups and legalizing same-sex marriage. Taiwan has also drawn closer to the United States, and tension with China has soared, with Beijing increasingly sending warships and planes to circulate nearby. A shift in power in Taipei could bring a shift in those relations.
Wherever we go from here in cross-strait relations, I think it's most important to adhere to the principles of democracy and to make decisions based on the common will of the Taiwanese people.
The will of the Taiwanese people remains somewhat split, but desire for independence is steadily growing. A poll released in September by the island's Public Opinion Foundation found that nearly half of Taiwanese people support formal independence. 1/4 prefer to keep the status quo, and just over 10% want to unify with China.
So, Victor, China has been stepping up rhetoric over reunification with Taiwan. It says that it has been part of China since the 17th century, but many in Taiwan disagree with being viewed as a breakaway province. Could you explain a bit further about this point?
The 2 regimes that appeared in 1949 on both sides of the Taiwan Strait were both Chinese. Both Chinese regimes. And both regimes claimed to be Chinese and to represent the only one China. But with time, along with time in Taiwan, and along with the democratization of the country, a so-called Taiwanese consciousness appeared. So democratization went hand in hand with the emergence of a new national identity. And now we can say with a fair amount of certitude that a majority of Taiwanese people do not identify as Chinese only. Some of them identify as Chinese and Taiwanese, some of them as Taiwanese only, but the portion of the population that wishes for a quick reunification with China is insignificant.
Now, before it transitioned to a democracy, Taiwan under Chiang Kai-shek, under the authoritarian rule, it remained a poor nation for decades. But since the 1980s, especially after it launched into the high-tech sector, its economy has seen stellar growth. It is now a global leader in the semiconductor industry, for instance, accounting for over 60% of global microchips and as much as 90% of the most advanced ones. So it's become an important economic power. It's now a member of the World Trade Organization, for instance. How has this economic success been made possible?
Well, it actually started before electronics and before the high-tech industry. It started a bit like for other countries in the region, like Japan or South Korea. It started with relatively low-tech goods, such as textile, bikes, this kind of things, for export. In the 1960s and 70s, and then gradually the Taiwanese economy shifted from these relatively low-tech goods to high-tech goods in the 80s, mostly around the electronic sector, and it's been now it has now become completely central in Taiwan's economy, to the extent actually that the Taiwanese economy depends to a large extent on these microchips you've been mentioning, and the economic exchanges with China have played a decisive role in this growth, because China has served as a kind of new engine for Taiwanese growth in the 1990s and the 2000s. And now it's both an asset and a problem, because Taiwan is basically reliant on on the country that threatens its very existence for economic success.
So once again, relationship with China, very important for Taiwan's economy as well. Now, this year's election has been also made significant by the emergence of a third major candidate. None of them calls for outright independence or unification with China, but differ on how they want to build future relationships with Beijing. For many voters, the economy and social equity are also important factors. Our correspondents have sent us this report.
War or peace? That's the rhetoric from Ho Yu-yi, presidential candidate of the Kuomintang, the main opposition party that is backed by Beijing.
Taiwan has become the most alarming battleground in the world. So opposing the Progressive Democratic Party is refusing to send our children to war, okay?
This student presides over the Kuomintang Youth League. His main concern, national security.
My younger brother was born in 2005, so he has to do a year of military service, unlike me. I only served for 4 months. This is a concrete example of how we feel the rising tensions across the strait. In recent years, we've seen China firing missiles, conducting military drills, very real threats.
When President Ing-wen took office 8 years ago, China stopped communications with Taipei. Now, the Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party, aims to resume dialogue and to strengthen economic ties with Beijing. But for the ruling party, Taiwan's sovereignty comes first. To them, greater economic dependence would be a step towards eventual unification.
To defend Taiwan, vote for the Progressive Democratic Party in the presidential and legislative elections.
This campaigning legislator is close to William Lai, Vice President of Taiwan and presidential candidate, pictured next to him here.
We don't want to provoke China, let alone start a war, but how can we guarantee peace? William Lai, our candidate, puts forward 3 points. First, to ally ourselves with democracies around the world like the United States and Japan. Next, to strengthen our national defense. And finally, to develop our economy.
For these voters, Beijing is seen as a threat.
China is frightening. They spread false information, they infiltrate us. Our law isn't adapted to deal with that.
China's centrality in election debates, a political division that annoys these inflation-hit students. They support the third presidential candidate, Ing-wen. In the space of just a few months, he has come into his own with a campaign that focuses on the high cost of living.
The Kuomintang governed for 8 years, and Tsai Ing-wen for 8 years, and Taiwan is only getting worse. Prices keep rising, there's a shortage of eggs, a shortage of water, a shortage of workers.
According to Ing-wen, the Kuomintang cooperates too much with China, and the Democratic Progressive Party is too confrontational. He claims to be able to find a balance between the two.
So, Victor, all three main candidates are actually pro-status quo, not pro-independence, no pro-China as such. Yet the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's official party line is to work towards Taiwanese independence. They have yet to drop that quote. Now, is it still the real goal?
Well, President Tsai, who is currently in office and who will, give away her seat very soon, would answer that Taiwan is already de facto independent and therefore does not need to seek formal independence, which is a kind of elegant way out of the problem, of the conundrum. I think a formal independence of Taiwan is off the table. It's clearly a casus belli for Beijing, and it would be received very poorly in Washington as well, because one thing the Americans do not want is being dragged into a war with China for such a symbolic issue. I mean, it's crucial symbolically for many Taiwanese, but definitely not for the Americans, right? So, no, I don't think we're looking at a formal independence anytime soon.
How high is the threat of China actually invading Taiwan militarily?
Well, that's the million-dollar question everyone's been asking for, decades now. So I don't know, of course. No one knows exactly. But I think it would be completely foolish to discard it. I think 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was pretty commonplace to say, they make noises about invading, but they won't do it. I think it would be very, very imprudent not to take this military threat seriously. Whether it is a planned invasion or an incident that, degenerates and escalates, that's very, very possible, and I wouldn't discard it.
Right, a possibility still.
Yes.
And a million-dollar question, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's not Beijing's favorite, line of conduct. Peaceful reunification, as they say, would be by far their favorite option. But if they have to do it, they might do it.
They might do it. Well, Victor Louzon from the Sorbonne University, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you for your
invitation. And thanks you for watching. Do stay tuned for more world news here on France 24.